Asia. And as always, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We're back again at the same time tomorrow. We'll see you then. Goodbye.
This is DW News, live from Berlin. NATO says Russia has begun a new offensive in Ukraine. NATO defense ministers are meeting along with Ukraine's other military backers to consider Kyiv's appeal for more heavy weapons, including fighter jets. We'll take you live to Brussels for that. I'm Phil Gale. Welcome to the programme. Ukraine's Western allies are meeting in Brussels to discuss further military assistance for Kyiv. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says an expected Russian offensive in eastern Ukraine has already begun. And Kyiv's allies are in a logistical race to supply weapons and ammunition. US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin opened the meeting of the contact group, which coordinates military assistance to Ukraine.
The Kremlin is still betting that it can wait us out, but 1 year on, we are as united as ever. And that shared resolve will help sustain Ukraine's momentum in the crucial weeks ahead and help Ukraine travel the challenging road that lies beyond. And looking around this room today, I know that our unity will only grow. We all understand the stakes in Russia's war of choice. This isn't just about Ukraine's right to live in peace and security. It's also about the kind of world that our children will inherit.
And General Lloyd is expected to give a press conference in the next half hour or so. We'll bring that to you live. Ahead of that, we can go to our correspondent Terry Schultz, who's outside NATO headquarters there in Brussels. Welcome, Terry. So, regardless of what General Austin's warm words, are NATO allies on the same page?
You know, Phil, they really are remarkably on the same page when it comes to pledging support for Ukraine for as long as it takes. That doesn't mean that we don't see differences between the countries on exactly what aid they're willing to give, how much money they're willing to give. And some of this comes from their geolocation, because if you look at the Baltic states, of course, if Ukraine doesn't win this war, they fear that Russia is coming for them next. Countries further away, Belgium, Germany, they don't feel such an intrinsic fear that a Russian win in Ukraine would immediately mean crossing their borders. So these are differences between countries, and NATO has always had to deal with those differences. But there is not one single country that is withdrawing support for Ukraine and that doesn't say we'll be there as long as it takes. So they really are united on this, and I wouldn't say that if it weren't true this time.
And the US Defense Secretary has had a busy day of it. He's been at the NATO defense ministers meeting and also meeting with the International Ukraine Defense Contact Group.
Yes, the Ramstein meeting, as this group is called, is what's wrapping up now. And then the NATO defense ministers will move into their meeting at about 5 o'clock local time. So what's interesting about this Ukraine contact group is that it's actually something like 50 countries. So not just the 30 NATO allies, but some 20 more. And the reason we can't tell you exactly who those countries are is because they won't tell us. So it seems that some of these countries don't want to make it completely public that they are supporting Ukraine. We can't get a list of the countries who are in the defense contact group. So unless they've announced it themselves, we don't actually know. But this is really important. It's important for Secretary Austin to be able to say that countries around the world, and not just in Europe and the United States, are supporting Ukraine. And I think that means a lot for Ukraine as well.
Meanwhile, NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg has been saying that Kyiv needs ammunition more than it needs fighter jets. That said, Kyiv is asking for more fighter jets, so it doesn't seem like both parties are going to be necessarily happy with the outcomes of today's meetings.
Nobody I spoke with before this meeting, Phil, thought that fighter jets were going to be granted at this meeting. That's far off. But as we've seen time and again, including just a month ago when Ukraine came in and said, we want tanks, at that point, nobody was willing to give tanks either. A month later, everyone is looking at how they can deliver Leopards, how they can deliver Challengers. So Ukraine is right to not give up when they get a no on the first as the first response, and nobody would put it past them to actually come away with fighter jets at some point. It's just not going to be today.
And one of the startling things that's come out of the last day or so is the fact that Ukraine is using more ammunition in a day than the whole of Europe can actually produce. And Germany's defence minister has said his country will ramp up ammunition production. How complicated is it to do that, Terry?
You know, this is really important that Germany announced today that it has signed a contract to start ramping up the ammunition production, because I was told yesterday by a source here that not one single contract had been signed by Germany. So that there was a lot of talk about trying to increase the production of ammunition, but that when it actually came down to signing these deals in which the companies would start to change their production process, it wasn't moving quite as quickly. So this was an important announcement from Pistorius, and he knew that at the time, because you have to start sourcing the materials. I mean, it's a very multi-layered process. You have to get the raw materials, and those come from different places. Then the companies need to put them together, the explosives, and all of this is you know, you have to make deals all the way up the production chain, and this just wasn't happening. And so I think that now, finally, when you hear Secretary General Stoltenberg, you heard Secretary Austin say the same thing, that ammunition is you know, absolutely the first requirement for Ukraine to continue holding its own territory, that's when people are getting serious.
Terry, as you're speaking, we've been looking at pictures of the podium inside NATO headquarters at which General Austin is expected to speak, and we'll be keeping an eye on that as we speak. In the meantime, just as we talk about aircraft, let's go back a step and look at that decision to send Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine, which was a big no at first. Then Ukraine chipped away at that decision. Then that yes became a yes, and here's training, which has moved surprisingly fast from the yes to the training and then delivery at sometime in March.
That's true. Now, one of the concerns, Phil, when they're delivering these tanks, and each country, the UK is sending Challenger tanks, you know, each country is delivering a different tank. One of the concerns now, and Secretary General Stoltenberg mentioned this earlier, is that these all need spare parts. They all need ammunition, which we've been talking about. So, and they all need different kinds of training. So it's not as simple for Ukraine as that now they're getting Leopard 2s and everything's going to be great. They absolutely need to be able to keep these vehicles up, and it's very expensive and it's very difficult. And this was one of the reasons why the U.S. said it didn't want to send its top tanks, because they said it would be so expensive to fix them, and as well as taking a long time to get over there, that it wasn't really the best bang for the buck, so to say. So this is really important also, and I think that this is what we're going to hear coming out of this meeting. Maybe not so many big packages of new equipment, but a renewed commitment to deliver what they've already said they're going to deliver, and to make sure that there's ammunition and spare parts for those weapon systems that are already on their way.
And logistics training, logistics and training. When we look back at the start of this conflict, we can see how important that was when Russia suffered exactly these problems with these long columns of supporting supporting a convoy, which became targets at the start of this war.
Yeah, and remember that we learned through the failure of these convoys to sometimes move ahead at all, that Russia had not been keeping up its equipment. I remember following this Twitter thread endlessly that talked about how you could look at the pictures of these tanks and the convoys and see that they literally hadn't rotated tires. And so then when they started to try to move out, the tires blew. So we already know that Russia had to go into sort of its back shelves to bring out enough equipment to stage this massive assault on Ukraine. So presumably they're going to be having more trouble than Ukraine is with all of this new equipment coming in for Kyiv.
Right. So NATO meetings today, later today, international contact group meetings, but we don't expect anything significant to come out of this, just more of the same, more pledges and perhaps increased deliveries, but nothing significant in terms of a step up.
Well, that's not nothing. More of the same is more heavy weaponry for Ukraine. And I think that they appreciate every bullet that comes their way because they're running out of them. So I think that every one of these Ramstein meetings has come out with more and more support for Ukraine. And they absolutely do need the spare parts and ammunition. It may not be as dramatic an announcement as, as that the Leopard 2s are going to be on their way, but they absolutely are necessary for Ukraine to continue operating like they are and to try to regain and hold their territory. So I think that Ukraine must have known coming into this meeting that they weren't going to be getting fighter jets here. But again, they lay the baseline for what they want next, and everyone has to keep talking about it. But I think what they'll get out of this meeting will be very significant for them. Secretary Austin said it's now, with all of these 50-some countries together,
right,
it's $50 billion so far. So,
okay.
Yep.
Thank you for that, Terry. Let's go to NATO headquarters then. General Austin has taken the podium. Let's listen to what's being said.
Of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley. Secretary Austin will begin with some brief comments, followed by General Milley. I will call on the reporters, and due to time constraints, I would ask you to please limit your follow-ups. With that, I turn it over to Secretary Austin.
Well, thanks, Patrick. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. We've just concluded our 9th meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. I'd like to thank Ukrainian Minister of Defense Reznikov and his team for once again joining us today. Now, next week, the world will mark a grim milestone. It will have been a year since Russia invaded its peaceful neighbor, Ukraine. Our hearts are with the families of all the Ukrainian soldiers killed and wounded, fighting to defend their country, their sovereignty, and their fellow citizens. And we mourn alongside the Ukrainian civilians who have lost children and parents and loved ones as Russia has deliberately attacked civilian targets. Russia has inflicted a year of tragedy and terror on Ukraine. But the people of Ukraine have inspired the world. We deeply admire the resilience of the Ukrainian people and their determination to defend their territory, their sovereignty, and their freedom. And nations of goodwill have rallied together to reject Putin's vision of world chaos. Of a world of chaos where tyrants can trample borders and conquer their peaceful neighbors and break the rules of war. And that's what this contact group represents. Together we have made clear that we will support Ukraine's self-defense for the long haul. And we will move out with the urgency that the moment demands. Earlier this month, the United States announced another round of security assistance for Ukraine. The presidential drawdown announcement included more ammunition for HIMARS. It included 190 heavy machine guns to counter unmanned aerial systems from Russia or Iran, 181 MRAP vehicles, and more than 2,000 anti-tank munitions and other key capabilities. We also added $1.75 billion in Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative funds for critical air defense capabilities, including counter-UAS systems and more. And at today's contact group, we joined again with our valued allies and partners to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs when it needs it. And we continue to work together to provide Ukraine with full combat-credible capabilities and not just equipment. And that's why we discussed synchronizing our donations into an integrated training plan. And you can see the importance of our coordination and our common efforts to meet Ukraine's needs for armor. Among the members of this contact group, we have given Ukraine's defenders more than 8 combat brigades. This includes major contributions from the United States of Strykers and Bradleys and Abrams tanks. It includes the UK's donation of Challenger tanks and the contribution of Senator armored personnel carriers that Canada announced last month. It also includes the refurbished T-72 tanks that the United States, the Netherlands, and the Czech Republic are in the process of delivering, as well as Poland's latest donation of T-72s. And it includes the important steps from Germany, Poland, Canada, Portugal, Spain, Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands on Leopard battle tanks. Now, we also heard today about significant new air defense donations. That includes Italy and France, which jointly announced that they will provide Ukraine with the SAMP-T air defense system. And France also announced that it will work with Australia to ramp up 155mm ammunition production to support Ukraine. And finally, let me also thank Norway, which just announced that it will provide 7.5 billion euros in military and civilian assistance to Ukraine over the coming 5 years. And that's a very significant commitment. Now, all of these capabilities will continue to be important for Ukraine's success on the battlefield. But as I said last month in Ramstein, this isn't about one single capability. It's about delivering all the capabilities that we promised. It's about integrating all of these systems together. And it's about working with the Ukrainians to help them fight for their freedom. Now, we also had an important discussion today on our ongoing work on accountability. It's a priority for me and my contact group colleagues to ensure that our donations continue to be used as intended and that we move proactively to prevent arms proliferation. And we will keep working with our Ukrainian partners to ensure that all of the equipment that we're providing continues to reach the brave troops on the front lines. Now, a year ago, Putin assumed that Ukraine was an easy target. Putin assumed that Kyiv would easily fall. And Putin assumed that the world would stand by. But the Kremlin was wrong on every count. Over the past year, Ukraine's soldiers have fought valiantly for their country. Ukraine's people have shown deep courage in the face of Russian cruelty, and countries of goodwill have rallied to defend an open order of rules and rights. Together, we seek a world where disputes are resolved peacefully, where sovereignty is respected, where borders are honored, and where civilians are protected. Those are the values of this contact group. We stand united in our support for Ukraine's fight for freedom, and we will stand together, united and resolute, for as long as it takes. And with that, let me turn it over to General Milley.
Thank you, Secretary Austin, and thank you for your leadership, leading this ninth successive contact group. This is an incredible level of effort by many, many countries, and it wouldn't be happening without the leadership of Secretary Austin. Good afternoon to everyone, and let me start by giving my condolences to the people of Turkey and Syria with the tragic loss of life and suffering that has occurred because of the recent earthquake. Also suffering of the Ukrainian people. We are approaching the one-year anniversary of Russia's illegal invasion of a sovereign nation, the sovereign nation of Ukraine. And I want to thank the ministers of defense and the chiefs of defense that were here today, representing 54 countries that continue to participate in this group. The actions of those leaders over the last year have contributed substantially with real effect on the battlefield, and they collectively have demonstrated unwavering commitment to the defense of Ukraine. And a special thank you to the Ukrainian Minister of Defense, Reznikov, and his Deputy Chad, General Moisuk, who continue to display exceptional leadership. And my friend, General Zaluzny, who is on the battlefield every day leading his country's defense. 10 days from now is the one-year anniversary when Russia brutally, illegally, and in a completely unprovoked way invaded the sovereign nation of Ukraine. As the Secretary just pointed out, Putin thought he could defeat Ukraine quickly, fracture the NATO alliance, and act with impunity. He was wrong. Ukraine remains free. They remain independent. NATO and this coalition has never been stronger. And Russia is now a global pariah. And the world remains inspired by Ukrainian bravery and resilience. In short, Russia has lost. They've lost strategically, operationally, and tactically. And they are paying an enormous price on the battlefield. But until Putin ends his war of choice, the international community will continue to support Ukraine with the equipment and capabilities it needs to defend itself. Through this group, we are collectively supporting Ukraine's ability to defend its territory, protect its citizens, and liberate their occupied areas. In the face of a barbaric Russian invasion, Ukrainians remain resilient. The nation of Ukraine is united for one single purpose: to expel the Russian forces from their territory and to defend themselves. For Ukraine, this is not a war of aggression, it is a war of defense. For Russia, it is a war of aggression. The Russian military has paid tremendous costs in their war of aggression, and now they have resorted to sending conscripts and prisoners to imminent death. In recent months, the group who gathered here today pledged to provide significant quantities of battlefield capabilities: tanks, air defense, and munitions. 11 countries have pledged tanks, 22 have pledged infantry fighting vehicles, 16 pledged artillery and munitions, and 9 more pledged air defense artillery. The group is focused on delivering the capabilities committed and efficiently providing the training, the spare parts, the sustainment, logistics necessary for the full employment of these systems. Training, maintaining, and sustaining Ukraine's remains key for Ukraine to prevail. Throughout this war, Ukraine has showed incredible resourcefulness in how they integrate varied capabilities to adapt to the changing dynamics of this battlefield. Ukrainians have combined unbreakable will with innovative tactics and empowered their leaders to liberate their own country. Russia, on contrast, is waging a very costly war of attrition, while Ukraine is effectively leveraging their asymmetric advantages in order to defend itself. And the most important asymmetric advantage they have is courage, resilience, and tactical skill. This war is extremely dynamic, and Ukraine today is fighting while training and evolving for future operations. Ukraine will integrate recent commitments of armored vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, and tanks with fires to achieve the effect of synchronized ground maneuver. While Russia has waged this war for far too long, they will not outlast the Ukrainian people, nor the group of allies and partners that met today. The purpose for the United States and allies, as said by our political leadership, is very simple. It's to uphold the rules-based international order, an order that rejects the idea that big, strong, powerful nations can attack other smaller countries, that borders shall not change just by the use of aggressive military force. This is the very underlying founding principle of the United Nations at the end of World War II. Ukraine does not stand alone. 54 countries met today to ensure that Ukraine can defend itself and the principles that guide international conduct, and those principles will be upheld. We will remain a unified coalition. We will continue to uphold the values of sovereignty and freedom, and we will continue to support Ukraine. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Tara Cobb, AP.
Secretary Austin, you said earlier this is a crucial moment for Ukraine and that the allies need to get air defenses and munitions into Ukraine now. What are you seeing from Russia that makes this moment different? And the NATO Secretary General has already warned that Ukraine is burning through munitions faster than a rate that the allies can supply it. will you at some point need to ask Ukraine to do more with less? And then for Chairman Milley, did one of the missiles fired at the Lake Huron object miss? And if so, what happened to that missile? And if so, does that change your risk calculus for shooting down objects over U.S. soil? Are you starting to develop alternatives if and when you detect the next object?
So in terms of where we are, thanks, Tara. In terms of where we are in the fight, what we've seen over the last several months is a contested battlefield. We see a lot of activity in the Bakhmut area, which is where Russia is focusing most of its effort. We see Russia introducing a number of new troops to the battlefield. Many of those troops are ill-trained and ill-equipped, and so their casualty rate has been really high. What Ukraine wants to do in the, at the first possible moment is to establish or create momentum and establish conditions on the battlefield that continue to be in its favor. And so we expect to see them conduct an offensive sometime in the spring, and because of that, all of the partners in the Ukraine Defense Contact Group have been working hard to ensure that they have the armored capability, the fires, the sustainment to be able to be effective in creating the effects on the battlefield that they want to create. And so we believe that there will be a window of opportunity for them to exercise initiative and then change or continue to create the right conditions on the battlefield there. In terms of munitions, this has been a tough fight throughout, and Ukraine has been at this for a year, and so they have used a lot of artillery ammunition. We're going to do everything we can, working with our international partners, to ensure that we give them as much ammunition as quickly as possible, and that we'll do everything we can to sustain our efforts there as well. We are working with the Ukrainian soldiers in various places throughout Europe to emphasize additional training on maneuver, so that as they place more emphasis on maneuver and shaping the battlefield with fires and then maneuvering, there's a good chance that they'll require less artillery munitions, but that's left to be seen. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure that they have what they need to be successful, and that's what we continue to emphasize here in the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, and we think the training will pay additional dividends as well.
So Tara, on the balloon shot, yes, first shot missed.
So that's U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin at NATO headquarters, giving a press conference following today's meeting of the Ukraine, the International Contact Group. Let's go straight to our correspondent Terry Schultz, who's outside NATO headquarters and was listening in on that. Welcome back, Terry. Anything unexpected there? Anything surprising?
No, nothing surprising. I think that one of the things that Secretary Austin is really attempting to emphasize is that it's not just about getting big new weapons systems. It's about using them to their maximum capacity. He talked about how they're going to integrate these systems. They're setting up a new center to do more coordination. And he didn't announce a whole lot of new weapons, new deliveries, as far as I could tell. He said that Italy and France will be delivering some air defense, which we know is very, very important. And again, as we were speaking about earlier, Phil, he said now 11 countries are giving tanks. So a month ago, nobody was giving tanks. So that's some real progress for Ukraine.
Interesting answer to the second question he was asked, which was effectively, given the fact that Ukraine is burning through so much ammunition, will Ukraine have to do more with less? And the US Defense Secretary seemed to say yes, sort of.
I thought that was an interesting question, too, as well as an interesting answer. So I think that everyone is worried that Ukraine will literally run out of ammunition. I don't think they're there yet, and maybe that would never happen, but they would have to perhaps conserve more than they are right now. But this was an interesting answer because what he said that was that with more training, and they're very much putting as many Ukrainian soldiers as possible into training now, that they won't need as much. And with new weapon systems, perhaps they won't run through as many of the smaller caliber munitions as they are right now. But he also said at the end of that answer, as you'll note, that remains to be seen.
OK. So this is the first of a couple of big meetings for the US Defense Secretary. After this, he goes on to meet with NATO defense ministers. What are we expecting there?
Well, Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. That's the biggest issue here today. You can't get away from it. Tonight, the 30 defense ministers will have dinner with Finland and Sweden, who, of course, are knocking on the door. I haven't heard any progress on that issue of Turkey keeping Sweden out at the moment. And they'll also have, at that dinner will also be EU High Representative Josep Borrell, because one of the other important things about coordinating NATO's assistance to Ukraine is coordinating with the European Union, who is also doing training, who is also giving money back to the allies who give weapons to Ukraine. So the European Union has actually really stepped up on the defense side, and that's something that they want to see done most efficiently, so there's not duplication between NATO and the EU. That's something that's constantly a concern around here. So they'll all be discussing Ukraine tonight.
Thank you so much for that, Terry Schultz in Brussels. Now to the earthquakes in southern Turkey and Syria. More than 37,000 people are now known to have been killed in this disastrous event. The United Nations says it is the worst disaster in the region for 100 years. Tens of thousands have been evacuated from the hardest-hit areas of southern Turkey. In Hatay province, the city of Antakya was almost entirely flattened. Well, our correspondent Julia Hard is in Antakya and told me more about the situation there.
Well, Antakya is a city in ruins. The scale of the destruction here is massive. About 70% of the city